So the Core Champion Program is something that NACM has designed to encourage people who are participating in or have an interest in NACM to learn the key elements of what goes into court management. So they've developed the Court Champion Achievement Program. So we have this, and let's see if we can do this. New format here on this. There are 13 components or modules or competencies that are part of the Core Champion Program. If you complete all 13 and you pass the SRT, after this session you will see that there's an SRT, you will become what is called a Core Champion. And this will have you go through all 13 of the competencies that NACM is designed to help people master those skills to be an effective court manager. And then you can dive deeper in it. You can see that they have the different modules that are associated with it, vision, principle, and practice, and then the various competencies associated with those. So we hope that you'll take advantage of that opportunity and go forward with them. And as you look at this, what they try to do is strengthen us as court professionals, increase the exposure to the core, which will help us out as we go forward and help us as we work with both our internal, external stakeholders, and also to recognize attendance through the achievement of certificates, which you can also take to your supervisors, to your funding unit, what have you, to move forward in the process. So there are also a couple of other certificates that you can achieve as you go through the process. And for everyone, you can read this, I won't go through it, but you can see that there are 5 different sub-core champion components that come into play for which you can also receive certifications. So that will help you mark your progress as you go forward in this journey. So you do this by attending a qualified session. Again, this is a qualified session. So you've already knocked that off your list. And then you complete the structured response form or test at the end. You submit that. Once you have that done, they'll review it very quickly. I know as I go through the process, I'm usually getting the responses back within 24 to 48 hours. Maybe it's because I was doing it during the winter break and they were kind of slow, but you're going to get them back fairly quickly and see what your progress is. So I encourage you to participate in this process, and then at the end, they encourage you to write an article, maybe do a review, possible publications. So a lot of things that help you progress as a court professional. So again, I would encourage you to participate in that process.
Good afternoon. My name is Zanelle Brown. I work for the State Court Administrative Office in Michigan. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have like a NACM buddy that you go to conferences with or you meet up at the NACM conferences? So Rich was explaining the core, but what Rich didn't tell you is like he and I are in a competition to see who can get the 13 classes finished first. So friendly competition is a great way to approach the core. What to expect while you're in this session? Did anyone go to the breakout session with Judge Pratt? Keep in your mind, and if you didn't go in that session, remember that exercise she had us do where we're thinking about what's in the headline and how we can change that headline and what would be some quotes? Well, we're going to use a case study, various case studies in this session, and we're going to bring the headline to you, and it's usually not the best of headlines. And we're going to have a discussion. We're going to have you talk with us, talk to those around you. What do you think the court should have been doing differently? So we're looking at it through the lens of public trust and confidence, people coming into the system thinking the system operates one way, being confronted with a reality that it doesn't quite operate that way, and then looking at it as a court manager, a court leader, what could we change to sort of balance those expectations and improve reality? So let me see where we are. Just to set the stage, think about where does the public most get their information about courts? What do you think? Is it from Judge Judy, Judge Joe? Is it reading the paper? Is it from you because you're the one who's telling them what's going on in courts? But oftentimes we don't know where they're getting their information from, but when they show up at our doorstep, they do have an unrealistic expectation of what we should be doing and how things should be working. The common themes. that we see throughout our courts. There's rapid resolutions, and typically we want everything done within 1 hour. They come to the door thinking that they are appearing on Judge Judy. I just get to tell the judge my whole story and she's going to find the truth. And in 1 hour, we're going to be done. And guess what? I'm going to be the victor. There's always this binary thing. One person is right, one person is wrong, this good or evil that they're coming in, not realizing that it's a little more complex than that. There's court rules, there's statutes, that type of thing. And then there's the procedural and legal details that are also in the court process that they don't have a clue about. They don't understand usually how cases get to court. I've had people show up at the doors basically saying, I want to see a judge. It doesn't happen that way. They don't have an idea about the caseload, the attorneys, the availability, the courtroom spaces. They just don't know. We as experts know what goes on in our courts, but they don't know. And then what's really disturbing is when the media doesn't know and they put out a false narrative. We're going to look at you today as difference makers, that you can go back, look at some of these case studies and work on changing what the headline should be. You may not be able to change everything in your court, but you may be able to give some input to make some great improvements. So again, when the public comes in, maybe they come in with a false expectation, but you're doing things to improve their knowledge of what the court looks like, but also to improve what their experience looks like. So I'm going to turn it over to Rich, and he's going to get us started with our first case.
Thank you, Sanel. So, when people come to your courthouse or your government building or whatever it is called in your jurisdiction, what is the reaction, what is the visceral response that people have when they show up there? Is it as warm and friendly as Grandma's kitchen? You go in there, there's good smells, there's good food, there's good conversation, you're just happy to be there. Or do you have the industrial pea soup bordering upon vomit walls, oftentimes cinder blocks? It's cold, it's sterile, it's not a friendly environment. Everyone's harsh, they're curt. You don't want to be there. Your darn near strip searches go into the building, and the people, they're about as welcoming as the threatened storm that they're saying might keep us all in town for the next couple days. Is that where you're at? So you look at that and you go, golly, I don't want to be here in the first place, but this darn court's got a legal monopoly, and they're making me come here. They don't treat me with respect. They don't even acknowledge I'm a human being. What am I going to do about that? Or how do you approach those types of things? And honestly, let's be realistic. What is the state of the facilities that we deal with as we work here? I've worked in a couple of different courts during my career, and not all of these things have happened in the courts I have been in, but they've been in some of the courts, and they've certainly been in other courts that I've looked at. So sometimes there are fires that occur in your court. Maybe that closes the court down. Sometimes there's flooding that just takes out the records. You might have a hurricane or quite the blizzard. You could have all sorts of mold. You might have bed bugs or other types of critters. There might be a lack of maintenance. You might have a power outage. I mean, quick show of hands, how many people remember when a good portion of the eastern part of the country lost power I'd say a couple of years back? That just shows I'm old, but it just shut everything down for roughly a weekend. And all operations essentially came to a grinding stop. So you have that, and again, if you're using those facilities, what is your reaction? How does that instill trust and confidence in you and the type of operation that you're dealing with? Are you comparing this more to the local convenience store or bodega at your corner, or some high-end fancy schmancy store where you're going to buy luxury goods, where they might give you the side eye as you come in, but once you get in, unless you're Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, in the first part of that scene, well, they bend over backwards for you. So you look at that and you look at the impressions. Judge Pratt mentioned that this morning in the plenary presentation and talked about how we greet, how we treat, and how we respect people as they come into the courthouse. Honestly, do we respect their shared humanity with us, or is it something else? Do we other people as they come in, and do our facilities represent that otherness as they come in? Do you have old beat-up chairs that probably wobble, or if you lean back, it's, I'm not sure this is going to hold me? Are your benches all carved up and destroyed or what have you? Are your facilities tired, dirty, or otherwise not presentable? So you look at those things and it raises a question of how we value our legal system. Some things you can't do a wish and a promise and get a brand new courthouse. You can't get the old marble mahogany fixtures that they have in some of the much older courthouses. Quite honestly, our budgets simply don't withstand that kind of thing. However, you don't want to look at this like you are the lowest end IKEA furniture that's there that you got when you were in college. And if you were lucky, it made it through both semesters and you just replaced it at the end of the year. So just a quick response from you guys. How would you propose handling these in treating your courthouse to have people feel welcome and inspire public trust and confidence among those people using your facilities? Anyone? I can't have put you all to sleep yet.
Or phrased another way, what are you currently dealing with in your facilities that the public is not expecting when they get there, and what's a proposed improvement?
That's why I work with Sanel because, well, she's smarter and she's a rich whisperer.
When I did work in a courthouse, I moved over to a probation office 3 years ago. One of the things that they had to address were like constant. There were constant issues to the point where like the courthouse had to close briefly to have the air quality inspected. And it was made public. It was in the news or whatever. So it brought this like instant like feel that the public trust was like kind of always did they spend the money to fix it? Did they put and it was something that was like out of our control. It was air quality. You don't know. You just had this general fear. So the courthouse that I had worked at spent the next. They spent the next couple years putting out access and fairness surveys and getting feedback from the public on what they felt in terms of like how the courts could improve, how they were doing. And based on that feedback, they then turned around and made some short and long-term changes that were both visible and weren't visible by fixing like some of the infrastructure. And they were in the middle of construction too, so that kind of helped. But one of the things that they did visually that helped, and I thought that was really great, really simple, was a coat of paint, changing the paint color and putting it in a color that seemed more warming and receptive. That also tied in with them building a new wing in the courthouse. So that combined, although that took a while, changed changed the public's perception, and it looked like an actual investment after the issue had occurred. So changing the visual state, I think, really, really helped, while you could also address the internal infrastructure issues.
So the visual really welcomed and warmed people as they were part of that process, as opposed to the old appearance, which was tired, and they had questions about going into a coal mine with the air quality that they periodically heard of. Got it. Any other question or responses?
Aloha, this is Miha with Grays Harbor County District Court, Washington State. Kind of tagging onto what you said, it's really embarrassing, so I'm hoping this isn't being live streamed.
It is.
I'm still gonna stand over here, but when you walk into my court, it is a historic building, and so change is difficult to do. I'm gonna look this way. So when you walk in the building, you see these beautiful painting murals of Robert Gray, a white settler that found Grays Harbor, talking to a bunch of Native Americans. It's bad. Okay, so all these teepees and tents and Native Americans, but here's Robert Gray because he's going to claim the land. That's the first mural you see. That used to be our seal as well. And then going up to Superior Court, it's beautiful murals as well. And this is the message that it says right above the judge. I got to read it to you because, here, hold this, Credo. Sorry. It's embarrassing, but this is something that we do think about quite a bit. On the right side of the mural, you see angels. I mean, it just looks like happy people and kind of like Greek looking. On the left side, you see what looks like maybe a red angel with a sword. You see a dead body laying on the ground. And right above the judge, it says, "Justice, the hope of all who are just, the dread of all who are wrong." I feel
That's really welcoming.
like when people come to my court, again, I was there for maybe 3 months. I never saw a single person of color. And so I was it for a very long time. Well, it felt like forever, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing in this place. I will tell you how I felt when I walked into that building. I was like, oh, I think I might have been a DEI call. And that's how I felt when I was asked to go in and interview over there. Since then, we have changed the seal. It's no longer the face of Robert Gray. And there's discussions about new murals and painting, but all that takes a lot of time, and we have a lot of work to do. But that was my first experience.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Ms. Jones.
So when you came into our courthouse, first of all, you had to come through the door and you had to go downstairs to get through security through one of the buildings. And what was there as you're walking down the stairs is like this most wanted poster. And it's like, do we really want to project that image? So the quickest thing was, let's take that down, but then you got to start thinking about, how do you take that down in people's minds? That this is a place where we're doing customer service. People are coming in. We're not law enforcement. So you got to start thinking, what perceptions can we change? And again, like you said, it can be paintings, it could be the brochures. All of that is something to look at when you're thinking about your facilities and some of the challenges there.
So it's really critical as we look at these things to see how it is, just as a real estate agent would say, what the curb appeal is for your court facility. When people come in, what is their response to you and what they believe or how they believe they're going to be treated as they come into your court. And because I am the Luddite in the group, I think I can just click here. Yep.
Near I-75 and East Warren Avenue. It will house the jail, the juvenile detention center, the Third Circuit Criminal Court, also the prosecutor and the sheriff's office.
If you have been following this, you know how long this odyssey has taken. Will Jones got a chance to explore the state-of-the-art facility before it officially opens its doors. Let's take a look.
Stretching 1 million square feet across 7 buildings, the Wayne County Criminal Justice Center will be the new home of the Adult and Juvenile Detention Centers, the Prosecutor's Office, the Sheriff's Office, the Clerk's Office, and the Third Judicial Circuit Criminal Division.
So instead of people having to drive around, find parking, go from point A to point B to point C, we have a one-stop shop for them to handle all of their business.
The detention facilities will house nearly 2,500 adult inmates and juvenile residents. Those incarcerated will have access to recreational spaces, a library, an area to meet with their families, and more. The center has been a long time coming. Back in 2017, the Detroit City Council agreed to swap land with Wayne County to move the failed jail site out of downtown to Russell Street near the I-75 service drive. In 2018, the county reached an agreement with Dan Gilbert's Rock Ventures to build the jail complex in exchange for the Division I and II jails, juvenile detention facility, and Frank Murphy Hall of Justice. Rock Ventures also purchased the unfinished Gratiot jail site. The project was supposed to be completed by the summer of 2022. Now, 2 years later, it's finally set to open.
Having the opportunity to work on the transition team for the last 5 years and actually see this building, being born from the ground up, watching the foundation and the walls go up and seeing everything that has been put into this facility, I think it's a gigantic win for both the CEO's office and each one of the stakeholders.
The new Justice Center opens September 3rd. It's expected to welcome 1,000 visitors each day. Parking is free here, and the center is also accessible by public transportation. Will Jones, Local 4.
Is an inside view of a new criminal justice facility in Wayne County, Michigan. And they just built this new facility. The old one was bought out by a developer. They put up a new courthouse as well as it's a whole criminal justice center campus. And they spent a number of years putting this all together. Interestingly, as they completed the project, some of the things that were designed weren't quite facilitated, I think is a good way to put it. The story would have offered us a little bit more on this. But the transport of prisoners, meeting with the prisoners, became a little bit of a challenge, even though they're connected within the same facility. So you have to think as you're designing your courthouse, how to make sure that we can treat people in a safe but a secure, respectful fashion. And that doesn't always come into play. So when we think about these, both short-term and long-term developments within our courthouses and our facilities, can you think of any ideas of what we can do to build public trust and confidence in the facilities that we use? And how are we going to do this so all people are feeling that they have the respect of the institution? Or as Judge Pratt mentioned this morning, well, my probation officer's here, my prosecutor's here, where is my defendant? Or more importantly, where is the defendant? There's not even a personal pronoun there. And certainly you don't want to use names and treat people like they might be human beings. So let's chuck that out to the curb. But it's very important as we look at this, how we're going to do it. So think of issues that can challenge access and diminish public trust and confidence that may exist in your court or another court that you've experienced. And just to put in the frame of reference, we had an older courthouse in Michigan, historic building. So there was a person who went to use that courthouse who had some access issues. Mainly, the person was in a wheelchair. To access the courthouse, you had to go up a broad promenade of steps. They did not have an elevator or a ramp or anything that was associated with it. So the person wheeled up, got to the entrance on the courthouse, like, well, what do I do? Eventually someone came out, and the workaround to provide access is they had some sheriff deputies carry this person into the facility. Now, okay, the person got there and eventually they carried the person out. However, if you were that person, how welcome do you feel in the institution that has not been designed in any way to provide you with any access? That was an open-ended question. It was supposed to provide a response.
I would be very humiliated to be that person who had to be carried in by law enforcement into the courthouse because the access limited me from being able to walk or to roll myself in or motor myself in my wheelchair or cart. We see things like this frequently, and I think we don't necessarily recognize it right away. Just the limited amount of access that some, especially really old buildings, have for our court users. We try to do the best that we can to work around it, but when we do have to work around something like that, we also need to take into consideration the dignity behind that, preserving the dignity for that person, and not having them feel humiliated in that process of providing them access.
I agree. And if you think about that, you are now othered as you try to come into that courthouse. And no matter how confident you are, you look at this.
Jiffy Lube.
Really? And how are you going to respond as you go forward to what is certainly one of the more important days in your life? So now I'm going to turn it over to Zanel as we talk about another issue.
Carnell Alexander is a wanted man tonight.
The state of Michigan is demanding he pay thousands of dollars or go to prison.
And it's all because of a child support case that has spiraled out of control.
And as 7 Action News reporter Kim Russell reports, it's a case with a bizarre twist because everybody agrees the kid is not his.
I feel like I'm standing in front of a brick wall with nowhere to go.
Carnell Alexander is forever haunted by the big news he got in 1991 during a traffic stop in Detroit. "You're a deadbeat dad," the cop said. "You're a wanted man. You're coming with me."
I knew I didn't have a child, so I was kind of blown back.
Blown back and locked up. Carnell was arrested for failing to pay almost $70,000 in child support. The state said he fathered a child in 1987 and had ignored a court order to pay up. It was the first Carnell had heard of it. And when you were telling them in court
That it was not my child, he told me it was too late to get a DNA.
But he did anyway, and the test proved Carnell was not the dad. Still, a judge was unmoved.
She told me that regardless to the fact of what the DNA say, because I didn't contact her 24 years ago, it's gonna stick. Case closed, I gotta pay for the baby.
What the court focused on was this. Records show Carnell ignored a court order of the paternity case in the late 1980s. Action News pieced that chain of events together. Here's what we found. The state then sent a process server to Carnell's dad's house in Highland Park. The process server was supposed to deliver to Carnell this summons. The process server then signed this summons saying that Carnell was delivered it, but refused to sign it.
I wasn't there, so I couldn't refuse to sign.
Indeed, records show Carnell had been arrested as a young man and was locked up when the process server came to the house.
I had no knowledge that I had a child support case pending against me.
As for why there was a case at all, someone had put Carnell's name on an application for welfare benefits, an ex who was in a jam when her baby was born.
I had to turn to welfare to get assistance to take care of them, and I had to put him down as the father. That was the only way I can get assistance.
While she doesn't want to show her face, this woman is now fighting to help Carnell.
Everything is my fault that I put him through.
Do you think that he should have to pay this money?
No, he shouldn't have to pay it at all. Want everything to go away for him so he can go on with his life.
We still know it's not my child. Let's do what we need to do, what's right.
A few months ago, a judge did erase the debt that Carnell owed that mom of the kid that's not his, but not the debt owed to the state, $30,000 for welfare benefits paid over the years. He says he's going to keep fighting until all of the debt is erased. Kim Russell, 7 Action News.
So here's the case study. Here's how it goes. In November, usually it's sweep months for our media, right? It seems like when I was over the child support division, every November we were targeted. It's like, let's find the worst child support case we can find and let's put it on TV. This is a case where the father is fighting against $30,000 in child support. He had the order. He was ordered to pay. And then after the child turns 18, it becomes an issue. He finds out it's not his child. He's coming to the court at the customer service desk, and he said, I have a DNA, it's not my child. And the person at the customer service desk is explaining, but the law states we can't do a retroactive modification, and your coming in doesn't change anything. That's not how court orders change. So he sends letters, and he finally ends up filing a motion and gets before the judge. The judge can listen, but only can grant so much relief because you still have the law out there. So we see what the expectation is. We see the answers that he's getting from the judge, also the answers he's getting when he's coming to the public service desk. So you have the expectations, you have the reality. What could we do as court leaders to sort of balance that, to improve what some of the realities are? And there's a couple of things I'm not telling you, but I'll tell you after you give me some information. What's some thoughts?
Just providing clear information to the public. That way they know what the limitations are and what some expectations could be for the outcome.
Absolutely. Number one, that coming to an office window, an information window, there's only information. That doesn't start a legal process.
I think the use of resources within like your county, like your things like your border social services, like your welfare agencies, and things like that. The courts are limited on what information they can produce, like from a media standpoint, from like a public relations standpoint. So when you utilize your stakeholders who have a bigger background or maybe have more funding to do more advertising, they can spread more of a message about what the law actually says and what dictates. Like New Jersey, for example, has New Jersey Child Support Institute. They have njchildsupport.org. They have their own separate funding bucket. They can advertise on the radio. They can advertise on buses. So when things like our child support termination law went into effect back in 2017, they could spread that message much further than the courts did, which was, we were, relegated to just putting it on our websites and directions on how to do that. But the explanation actually came from our stakeholders. So utilizing them and their funding would actually help spread the message more.
And what I didn't share is that when you listen to the story, Mom comes forward. She says, the only reason I gave his name is that I needed to apply for some public assistance and I needed to provide someone's name. I had no idea it would have this type of implication. So again, that information from the agency who sends us the referral. So Mom would have known up front, should this person be named and that person doesn't participate in the process, there could be a default judgment. That person would be liable for the child support. All of that up front would have been helpful.
Well, my suggestion that may be all for naught. But I guess I was thinking at the inception of the case, educating the parties as to what their options are, establishment of paternity being one of them.
Yes, absolutely. And then also, like I said, it's Newsweek. So if we don't have a relationship with media doesn't understand, how can we expect for there to be good information out there? How can we expect for people to come in with the right expectations on us as well? So again, it's like building all these relationships, making sure communication is there, people know what to expect and understand processes. We have it out there in plain English. So when you come through the door, you enter the process, you have an idea of what it could look like.
Yeah, those storms and that flooding really made national headlines. Since then, there have been scores of people who have dealt with flooded out basements and lost property or heavily damaged property, and they've been looking for justice. Tonight, they're seeing it as a major setback.
The reaction is really stunned.
Paul Doherty talking with Fox 2, both as a victim of the fierce 2021 floods and as an attorney representing many others like him. He's shocked that a Wayne County Circuit Court judge dismissed the Detroit Water and Sewage Department and the Great Lakes Water Authority from 10 class action lawsuits regarding the massive floods in June of that year. The historic storms devastated homes in Detroit, Dearborn, and Grosse Pointe, including his.
I mean, I've been doing this 38 years. I get it. I have judges rule for me. I have judges rule against me. But generally, that happens after you have a full, fair fight. Okay? You get to gather evidence, you do depositions, you get documents, you have your experts look at things, you take their expert steps, you take people at the pump station, all those guys that were trying to bail water out of the pump station all night, and then you figure out, okay, what happened here? We had none of that. Okay, we had zero.
He shared these pictures of the damage to his home and neighborhood, an early morning discovery he'll never forget.
I walked out 2:30 a.m., looked down my basement stairs, literally the water was up to the top stair. It was like a brown lake I was looking at. And it didn't compute at first. I'm like, what am I looking at here? And I finally realized it was the entire neighborhood was full of water, cars floating around. It was total devastation.
He says that leaves him and hundreds of others without a chance to show what they say went horribly wrong. Paul is part of the Vin Johnson law firm, representing many other flood victims too.
We know that a pipe burst inside Conner Creek Pump Station flooded a control panel, causing further electrical breakdowns. Those are the kind of things we could have gotten into. In other words, had, say, 15 of the 16 pumps run like they're supposed to, how much water could have been diverted versus 3 or 4 pumps running during the critical time.
Reactions to Judge Annette Berry's decision pouring in. The Detroit Water and Sewage Department released a statement saying, in part, "We are pleased with her decision, which will allow us to focus our attention on continuing to build capacity in the combined sewer system and reduce weather-related basement backups in our city." The Great Lakes Water Authority says on Friday, March 3rd, the trial court dismissed several cases related to the 2021 rain events. The GLWA recognizes the importance importance of this litigation and appreciates the court's thoughtful consideration. Because other cases related to this event have not yet been decided, we will have no further comment at this time. Paul Doherty says the problem is Michigan's law granting governmental immunity, meaning governments can't be held accountable in his view, and he's vowing to keep up the fight.
And we've been a real proponent to have that law changed because it's not fair to the people that are hurt.
So where does that fight go from now? Well, the legal team representing the victims, they say they're going to take their case to the Michigan Court of Appeals, and depending on how that goes, they're looking to take it all the way to the state Supreme Court. For now, reporting live, Dave Kinchin on The Edge.
And we see this fight happening also against the Oxford School District. We know that they're appealing that case as well, people looking to hold people accountable. But Dave, in this case, though, if they do, with government immunity, and they're able to sue these people, if that is dismissed, then isn't it the taxpayers, though, that end up footing the bill for that lawsuit in the long run?
Yeah, the taxpayers can certainly get hurt in this, no doubt. We also talked about, could there be a political solution in terms of changing this law? And the attorneys we spoke with say there's a better bet that this could be changed at the state Supreme Court level. They say there may not be the political will to make that change.
And maybe something will change if government immunity changes as well. All right, thank you, Dave Kinchin, for that live report.
Many of you may remember that, at least those of you who live east of the Mississippi, in the spring of 2021, we had some unusually heavy rainstorms that came through, at least in the upper Midwest. And in southeast Michigan, we were hit with a couple deluges. They were described as 1,000-year rains. Well, the city of Detroit, it was founded in 1704. And while the plumbing system or the sewer system in the city doesn't date back to 1704, it does date back before the turn of the century. And it's kind of older. And since the sewer system, at least in the city and the inner ring suburbs, was first instituted, there's been a huge growth in outer ring suburbs, and they've connected it to, I'm not even sure what you call it when you go beyond the outer ring suburbs, but people are still commuting in. But they have this, and they're putting all of this sewer water into a centralized sewer system. So you have a 1,000-year flood, and you have a sewer system that was designed for a universe that no longer exists. Shockingly, and I'm not trying to make light of this, but the system failed. And there was flooding, especially as you came closer and closer to the operating facilities. So this resulted in widespread flooding throughout the eastern suburbs and the eastern part of the city of Detroit. As a result of that, the link I'm not going to click on because I've just given up, is that there was a number of lawsuits that were filed against the water system, the sewerage system, the municipalities, because of this flooding. And there was a summary disposition or judgment motion that was filed based upon governmental immunity for these entities. And ultimately, the trial court judge granted that based upon the law that existed. Well, if you were the person who suffered a significant loss based upon this 1,000-year rain, and you would also suffer regular losses depending upon where you lived, oftentimes in lower economic neighborhoods. If you had a 10-year rain, in short, if there's water, you're going to get some water in your basement or on your street, what have you. Well, these folks were kind of miffed because there was a lot of water in that rainstorm. However, based upon the law, the judge granted the motion for summary disposition, and that ended the case in the trial court. Well, they went to the news, and there were some news stories about this that focused on the human suffering and the hardship that resulted from this flooding. It's undeniable that that occurred and that people suffered great losses in any number of different ways. One of the things that the news story didn't adequately focus on were the actual legal issues that came into play. You may recall at the start of this presentation, we talked about that, and one of the things we talked about was having good relations with the media in an effort to try to get the complete story there. Here, It was, look at the tragedies that these people suffered. Look at the uncaring court that denied their relief, that just cast these folks, and now you have photos of all the lost belongings on the curb, the damage, water up to the stairs in the basement, what have you. Just the human suffering and the misery that comes into play. And they're focusing on this. But the legal issues, what the courts do, that does not become the focus of the story because, oh, let's be honest, it's a complex issue. Things like governmental immunity and how it operates and when it works, when it doesn't work. What is the impact when you're designing a sewer system? And is it designed for a 10-year reign, a 100-year reign, a 1,000-year reign? How do people like to pay their taxes? Do they want to design the perfect system for the entire universe of all sets of circumstances, no matter what? Again, my father's an engineer, and I talk to him nearly every evening. He has a rather clear view in a very technical engineering capacity in how things oftentimes work. And we joke about it that he has a lot of black and white in his world. The only white I've got is in my hair, and the rest of my world is pretty gosh darn gray because I need all of these different factors to come into play and how do they work and sort these things out. Where do we go from here? And that's one of the things that we as courts have to do. And it's why we don't have that 47.5-minute rush to justice that you see on those hour-long TV dramas. Because it takes longer to find out what is happening. So in this case, you have the story, you see the pain and suffering, and then the news station moves on to something else. I can tell you that this case is up on appeal, and it's coming up. I believe the first briefs have been filed on it, so they should be getting oral argument within probably the next 8 to 9 months. But it'll be curious to see where it goes from here as the law evolves. But as court professionals, we know that that's part of the process. The law is not a stagnant thing. It is going to evolve as we go forward. However, how do we convey that to the people in the court? When they sense an injustice, and someone just throws up their hands like, that's the way it is. Are we instilling trust and confidence in those people using the courts like, gosh, there you go. Thanks for playing. We have to do a better job in instilling what is going on. We can't give them legal advice. It would be improper because we would move from that neutral position, but we can explain parts of those process. That old saw that comes into play, I'm sorry, I can't give legal advice. It's really not very effective in addressing the person because now the person's like, okay, I'm going to go to the next desk, and the next desk, and that next window, and that next door. So you haven't solved anything, you've just passed that person on, and that person is more frustrated than they were when they first came in. So if we address what their needs are and work with them, explain these processes to the extent that we can, it becomes more helpful as we try to work on these people. So we've grown accustomed to parties arguing their cases in the court of public opinion. Think about any number of issues in our lives that you see being argued out by people who are talking past one another. But does that really accomplish anything? Whether we're right or not, talking past someone is not a solution. And when people go to the media to argue their cases, they may have a long-term goal to have this done, but what is it accomplishing to instill that trust in what we as a court are doing? How does that work, and how are we responding to educate the community to do this kind of things? Do we host school children into the court for mock trials or tours and let them see what courts do? Do we encourage internships in our court for high school students, for college students? Do we have Take Your Child to Work Day so people can see what's going on? Do we go out into the community and show people that if you work in a court, you're not just a judge wearing a robe. Maybe you're a probation officer, maybe you're a clerk, maybe you're a court reporter, maybe you're an administrator, or any of the other number of things that people do who work in our court system. And then we have to continue to develop our relationships with the media. We can't ignore them. You have the fact that You can put a blast out there on your social media feed for your courthouse or something else, or you can storm away in an interview when it doesn't go your way. Who's controlling the narrative at that point in time? You need to develop those relationships so you can reach out and have those conversations with people so they know what's going on, so they feel welcome to ask. If you don't do that, if you just shut the door, okay, the door's closed. I will just do with what I have and make my story from here. And then we talk about judges being neutral decision makers. Quick show of hands. Has anyone in the past couple of years seen any stories in any form of media that suggest that judges are anything but neutral decision makers? Okay, I see a really shy group of people here. Sorry, we're on video. Have to do that. But you get the idea. There are regularly stories that justice is biased. What do we do when we tell our story to combat that imagery? Maybe people don't necessarily like how a case turns out, but why is that the case? How often do we write stories or articles or engage in conversations as to why something has turned out the way that it has? It becomes really easy at a point in time. That's justice. This is done. I'm going on to the next case. But what about all those people who were left behind? The people who lost all those furniture and their houses in the story I just told you about. The gentleman that Janelle just told you about who was tagged with a judgment for a paternity case for a child that wasn't his. And when he came to contest that, when he finally figured out that he had resources, he ran the door, wall, closed windows. How do we go about doing this so people feel that they can come to the court? Now, I'm not talking that we become Monty Hall in Let's Make a Deal or Oprah, you get a car, you get a car. That's not the way courts work. We understand that. But we do have to have people understand what the heck it is we do and why it is that we do this. I mean, when people think of attorneys, they usually have a couple of different images. One is someone dressed in very sharp clothing who charges buckets and buckets of money. Think of if you've been around a little bit longer, something like LA Law, Ally McBeal, to Suits. And you see the clothes these people wear, the cars they drive, how they're throwing money around. They have these big palatial offices. And people are watching this going, gosh, that sure would be a good way to live. I sure couldn't afford that person, but gosh, that'd be a good way to live. Or you have the opposite end, and usually it's some down-on-the-luck attorney wearing a shabby suit, just mulling along. Maybe they're working out of their car, just getting by. Maybe they have a substance issue. They may have an epiphany somewhere in the show or the movie where they find their clarion call for justice, but then again, they may forget about that and they just schlep on by and justice is not done. Those seem to be the two pillars or poles that people have when they think about attorneys, and that conveys over to how people think of the legal process. So we need to work proactively about that to have people look at us and see that, okay, there is a decision here. This may or may not be an end point. However, this is how the process works. This isn't bang, it's over and done.
So picking up where Rich was leaving off, what can we do differently for people to walk through our court doors, walk through the legal process, and not have that unrealistic expectation? What are some ideas? If you don't want to talk to us, talk to your neighbor. Tell your neighbor one or two ideas. What have you done differently in your court? Or are you letting everyone just have this misconception of how your court operates?
Some of the programs that we've been focusing on are annual law days, and I know our state has also put together a work group for an annual law day. We also, two of our courts recently hosted shouldn't say children, but educational programs for 8th graders who are studying the judicial system and law, and they come in and do mock trials. So reaching out to the communities or having the communities be able to come in and teach for like the children, but also these are put out there in the media. And so our community can see that our court is doing something other than just, like they think, putting people in jail.
Right. So you're doing something to work with the communities. Sounds like you have partnerships with schools and law enforcement.
Yeah, making sure that staff know what the full process is. So that the frontline staff, if someone asks, what's going to happen here, is able to explain kind of the full process so that they get all the information up front.
Explain the full process without all the acronyms, right? Without talking the legalese. What are some other things? What are some other things you're doing in your courts?
We do have a Bring Your Kid to Work Day, and we bring together all of our departments, so our sheriff's department, our prosecutor's department, judges, everything like that. And we kind of go through the stages of how it all
Your
works.
sheriff's department is your department?
Well, we work, our county works really closely together. So it's basically anybody that we work with internally.
The very justice stakeholder partners.
Yes,
okay.
all those partners, and we get them to kind of go through a whole process and procedure of where a case might start and kind of go through that realm as well.
One of the programs that we've started in Michigan is where workers are going through like some simulations. So say it's a returning citizen simulation where the workers are actually, the staff come in and they get a half-day training. When you're returning to the community, well, first of all, you got to go report for probation, you got to find a job, you got to figure out where you're living with housing and all of that. And they're going through that and they're actually experiencing some of those roadblocks. And then they're walking away with an understanding. You can be helpful and help this person succeed, or it can be very challenging by some of the things that you're doing. And it's not easy to try to accomplish all of this within a set time period to move forward as well. Other ideas? What about our civic education programs in schools? It seems like every time we had a new CEO at the county, it was like talking to that staff person. There are 3 branches of government, and this is what the court does. So sometimes, it's very helpful if you can get to somebody before that occurs. As far as community outreach, like I said, and with the court I worked at, it seems like we were in the news cycle only when things were happening that were bad and negative. The reporter would show up, demand answers. And at one point, when I wasn't the court administrator, I had a conversation with my boss who was, and I said, she's going to air a story that doesn't accurately depict what happened. And it was a child support story. And this story was that the court is still collecting child support on a child who's deceased. And I said, well, here's the thing. Our computer doesn't know if someone is deceased or if they're alive unless someone brings that information with a death certificate and we can record it. So if she wants to report that story that way, she's doing a disservice to the community. If she wants to come in, sit down, and I can tell her without talking about that particular story, what our process is, I think she'll have a better story. And then so when she came in, she did agree to come in and I walked her through the process. But then I went out to fatherhood organizations and I walked them through the process. What does it mean if you don't open that door when the process server comes and they get, alternative service? Basically, you've been put on notice, you've been sued, and if you do nothing, the court ends up with a judgment. And then when you come back and you decide to do something, it may be too late, depending on the circumstances. So it was really about the court going out of its way to go in the community to educate. What other efforts have you done with community education? How are you approaching it in your courts? Or what could other courts do differently? Maybe it's not your court.
So in New Jersey, I'm from Essex County in New Jersey. We do community outreach where we go out into the community. We have different departments that we call it a community informational fair. So we have different aspects of family court, probation, child support, the sheriff's department, different other agencies that support the community like CASA. And we
And
have
CASA is, I'm a CASA supporter. CASA is
it's court appointed
Special Advocates,
There we go.
and it's nationwide. Go
Yes.
ahead.
We also have DCPMP, which is formerly DIFUS. And we actually have our HR that provides employment opportunities. So we come out into the public and we educate them on processes and give them resources that they may need as far as court appearances so they won't be fearful. They'll be more knowledgeable. And so, I mean, it's been working. We've done 2 sessions already. We go out into the community. So it's not at the courthouse. We don't want to invite them into the courthouse where it'll be sort of like
Where they'll be
one-sided. So
traumatized by the
right.
art.
Yeah, so we actually go out into the community and meet them somewhere like the public library or one of the universities nearby. We get some volunteers from college university students to assist. And it seems to be working well. We've gotten good feedback so far.
How long have you been doing it?
We promoting it probably like since last year.
That's good.
But, yeah, we've been out 2 times already into the community. So we looking forward to another one in the spring. And one of the other things we have internally is we have a 10-part customer service process where we work with our staff. And each month we go over a different aspect of customer service to build on their customer service skills as well. Right now we've been through 5 sessions. So we want to complete that session. This is for the entire family division where we're trying to improve on their customer service skills. And we also have a greeter program where every morning we have a greeter at the entrance of the building, meeting the public and giving them guidance on directions of what department they need to go to, so they won't be walking around the building going from place to place.
Awesome. Sometimes it's hard to start those community outreach programs. I know when we first started ours at the court, when we went, people were afraid that, oh, this is a sting. You're just going to arrest us. My uncle said that, you brought everybody to the baseball field saying, hey, we're giving out free TVs. And then out came the sheriffs. I was like, that was in 1960. What did that happen? So it's like you're still living in that past history until you have a different interaction with that community and build that trust. And we could not do it ourselves as a court. We had to tag team with like a legal services provider. We had to make sure it wasn't on court property. And then in addition to that, you had to say, this is a no arrest zone, things like that, to build that trust and confidence. And our program started, well, it's not my program anymore. The program started in like 2006, and it's been going strong. And it started off, first of all, court staff volunteered their Saturday to be at the library to do that work. Everybody who showed up on those Saturdays were volunteers. The work became so important and people became so involved that now it's like part of what your work, they're adjusting your work schedule to allow you to do this. So it's not an added responsibility. But one of the things I think is really important is that when you're hiring people, are you looking for hiring people who are willing to extend that type of time and services to the community? Or is it the person who's like, like Judge Pratt was saying, well, no, I give people a hard time. So you're looking for, people who are willing to do that. So I think community service is huge. What other community outreach programs have people started recently?
I'm also from New Jersey. So we have what has been called the Jobs Initiative, which is judiciary's opportunities for building success for our probation clients. So coming back into the workforce. But one of the things that's morphed out of it for not only helping them, but talking to the employers about what we do, why it's important for them to hire, but working with colleges and universities for things that they may need, soft skills. But then when we're doing job fairs, actually being there not only for probation, but bringing our HR department, because they might want to work for the judiciary, but our ombudsman, actually looking for other divisions like civil and municipal for them to come in. So in that job fair, it's not only people coming back for reentry, sometimes it's the public. So that offers an opportunity to go, this is what we offer. We can help you with your services. Here's some information, so that actually gets them to see a different side of the courts, because we're actually out there in the community. So it allows us to actually go, we care about what we do, and we actually are a part of the community, and we're an integral part. So use us, we have other resources, and we're there for you, and that we care.
Yeah. Anyone else? How many of you are having problems with jurors showing up? People showing up for jury services. How many of your courts have that issue? I see some heads nodding. What are you doing to encourage that? Any outreach on that? One of the things that we did is that our jury services is the area that we said that, would be responsible for arranging mock trials and talking to the schools. Because we not only want you to know how a trial looks, we want you to know what a jury looks like. So when you get that summons, when you're 18, you're actually going to show up. And that we want you to feel proud that you're showing up for jury services. And one of the other things that's been very helpful is that when the judges come down after jury services, if you haven't been selected, to thank you for taking your time and showing up, and they give you a little certificate. So things like that have been helpful as well. So definitely when you're thinking about community outreach, look at ways that you can engage in the community to help improve what the public's perception of you is. Because oftentimes, as I pointed out, they're looking at Judge Judy, they're looking at Joe Brown and all the other reruns, and they don't have a very good perception of really what courts do and how they do it and how they are an integral part of the community. And of course, parking ticket amnesty is one. We've done bench warrant amnesty as well, to tell the community, hey, we understand that people make mistakes, but everything that occurs is not like it's going to be detrimental and follow you forever and ever. We already know it doesn't work. I did the civic responsibility one too. Okay, you have additional.
Now, Zanelle asked, how many of you are having challenges with having jurors appear for your courthouse? I'm going to ask that question a little bit differently. How many of you received a summons for jury duty? How many of you were excited that you got the opportunity to go forward and see how this process worked? And just to build upon that, if you weren't seated, how many of you were bummed out that you did not get to serve as a jury? I just had it. I was supposed to serve in December. I was so miffed that the darn case settled. Like, come on! Fourth time. None of the times have I been able to even get into the jury box. I'm beginning to think it's me, not the system. But I find it kind of funny about this, because if you look at the people who, their initial reaction when they're called to jury duty, I'm going to paint with a fairly broad brush here, but they usually hate the prospect. Why are you screwing up my life? They come to the courthouse, and I have the greatest respect for the people who work in my jury office, because especially on Mondays. Mondays are great days to begin with, but that's our busiest jury day. People come in, grumble, grumble, grumble. You would think a thunderhead would blow into the room because of all the grief that was in that room. It's like, gosh. So he comes in. We typically bring a judge down to do an orientation after the video. The video, it's there. It's an okay video. But the judges oftentimes are very dynamic in how they make their presentation. And they talk about the involvement of the citizen and how important it is to us being able to go forward with the justice system, that we cannot exist without them. It's kind of like that halftime speech you see in a lot of the sport movies. Yeah, let's go. And you see some of the people getting a little bit pumped up. And then they get called. Now they're out in the hallway going off to the court. Now it's real. And it's like, oh no, this is really going to screw up my life. And you put them in the courtroom. The judge starts the voir dire process. The attorneys may be involved in the voir dire process. You're starting to go through peremptory challenges to cause. You're sorting people out. And inevitably, you have people saying, I'm sorry, Judge, I cannot judge people. It's my personally held belief, I cannot judge people. And again, I'm painting with a very broad brush because I believe that some people live this to their very core. And the other people, they're laying on their horn as they're pulling out of the parking lot. How dare you be in this parking lot with me and get in my way? It's like, that kind of seems like judgment to me, but I'm not certain. I'm kind of new here. But you have folks like that. Eventually, you have people who sit on the jury trials. And I'm not talking about these very long jury trials. I've been watching from a distance a criminal case going on in the city of Chicago in Cook County, and that started in October. The jury's been deliberating now for at least 8 days. I cannot imagine sitting through a case that takes that much of your life. And there has to be something that you can speed this process up to streamline it. And sometimes you have judges, they'll do a half day here, half day there. And think, no, get this darn thing done. However, it is what it is, so I'm speaking out of the top of my hat. I don't know all the details. Most of the people that I've spoken with, and I've been in the court system for almost 37 years now, and I've worked with juries for an awful lot of that time, they serve as jurors. And their responses go, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. To, this is the greatest thing. That was so fascinating. Can I do it again? And I find it really interesting because as you become more knowledgeable about the process, and you may have caught a theme in the presentation that Zanelle and I have done today that education is somewhat critical to what we do to instill public trust and confidence here. But as you go forward and you develop that understanding of what courts do, it becomes more meaningful. Now, someday, with any luck, I'm going to have that experience with calculus. Because I can tell you when I took calculus in college, it did not happen. I do not understand it. And whoever came up with the concept of imaginary numbers was just trying to mess with me. That's all there is about that. So if someone can explain this to me and they can have the reaction that most people have with jury duty, I would appreciate it, but I still bear a grudge against calculus. But with the court system, and in particular with jury duty, when we educate people, when they become involved, when they see how this works, it's no longer a burden, but it's an opportunity. And people tend, while they may not turn cartwheels about it, they tend to get excited about it and see it as a process and something that they can do. So I'm going to touch upon a recent tragedy, and that is the recent shooting of the CEO for Wells Fargo. And that made the news cycle. It was all people could talk about for about a week, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks at the outside. I'm not trying to minimize what a tragedy that is. However, quick show of hands. In the last 10 days, who has heard about that case? Has it gone away? And I am being horribly facetious here. It's not as if the victim has returned to life, but it's that media cycle. They hit something, they hit it hard, and then they go on to the next thing. And it's important that we do our part to educate people about this. Because this case is going to come back. They're going to replay a lot of the videos and this, that, and the other thing. And I'm doggone. Had to find an appropriate adult word. It frustrated me to a great extent when people were starting to talk about the sweater that the alleged killer was wearing, and all of a sudden it was flying off the virtual shelves on Amazon as people were buying the doggone thing. I may have certain very strongly held opinions about this, but it's just like, where are we in the universe, and how does this deal with justice? And let's focus on what is important. But going back to civic responsibilities, my guess is in every one of your courts, and for our gentleman who's a probation officer, for the probation office, there are things, fines, fees, costs, and other forfeiture issues that come into play. And it's kind of interesting watching this. As I said, I am closing in on 4 decades of being involved in the justice system and watching the cycle as it goes back and forth, how people view the justice system. At times, people are, crime can't pay, must hit people, fines, fees, what have you. And they become really burdensome. And while there's always the legally required language in a statute that says that there's means testing to see if the person has the ability to pay, my opinion is that typically doesn't happen in a very in-depth, meaningful way for the people who are involved in this process. One of the ones I really appreciated was watching a judge, and he would go to the local restaurants many years ago that lined the street leading up to the courthouse I was working in. And he would engage in his colloquy with the defendant. Colloquy is something of a misstatement. It's more of a soliloquy. And he would ask the person whether or not the person was working. And the person would say no. And the judge would say, I don't know why not. I've got a handful of applications right here. You can go get a job right now. Well, in a perfect world, perhaps that judge could go out and get a job at the McDonald's or the Taco Bell or what have you. However, a person who may have a criminal history, may be suffering from mental health issues or other health issues, may have mobility or transportation or housing issues or any number or a combination of a number of those things, may not be quite as attractive as someone with a law degree, a long-term history of employment, and doesn't have some of those other issues. But we have these things about the fines, fees, and costs. Nell mentioned the aspect about the various amnesties that are out there. But as we work through these processes, what are we doing to educate and to address these issues when we have these fines, fees, and costs? There is an interesting conversation going on in the state of Michigan. And last spring, the Michigan Supreme Court, which had previously granted leave on a case regarding court costs, and it looked like they were getting ready to make a ruling on this, reversed course and rescinded their grant of leave and remanded it back to the Court of Appeals to take further actions in accord with their previous opinion. So the long and the short of this, from my perspective, I do not work for the Michigan Supreme Court. I have no inner knowledge as to what was going on. I am looking at this in Monday morning quarterbacking, which seems kind of apropos for the moment. And I looked at it and said, if the courts found this statute unconstitutional, the fact that a lot of courts and their funding units, because we have localized courts and funding in Michigan, would have been unable to sustain their operations. And without having a plan B in effect, the court could not rule on the legal merits of that issue. Now, to play devil's advocate for a moment, if the court were to have looked at that statute, is there a possibility it could have found it unconstitutional? There's a pretty decent possibility of that. And if that were to come into play, and you say something is unconstitutional, say, I'm sorry, courts, you can no longer do that. And you've pulled the carpet on funding for a lot of these courts. Well, at that point in time, the court has just cut its throat through finding this unconstitutional, and now you have unfunded courts. talk about a bad deal. So that one is out. There is a law that was passed through the Michigan legislature. They're looking at alternate funding for courts, and we're going to see how this all works out going forward. However, if any of you are interested, if I recall correctly, the case is People versus Travis Johnson. So if you're approaching the level of nerdiness that I have, you might find it kind of interesting to look at that and see what's happening in your jurisdiction as well. So I put this chart in, and you can see, I'm not going towards the link, but you can see I cut and paste this from a document. When courts become fundraisers, public trust and confidence diminish. So, as I recall, sorry, been a couple days since I looked at this, and they don't have, there was supposed to be a different line on there. But you can see how the funding was going up. And apparently my battery died, so I apologize for all that. So people who didn't hear me who are watching this remotely, I apologize. But are there any questions that anyone has here that they would like to add or we can potentially touch upon in the 15 seconds I have left, although we're more than happy to stay here? Yes, no, any questions?
Well, we want to thank you for the audience participation, and we also want to thank our excellent presenters. You gave us a lot to think about today. And just make sure you go and rate the session and rate the speaker. Again, we appreciate you all. Thanks again.